What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is February 9th, 2026, about 11 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 18th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 9 of Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, the great founder of the Black Panther Party. We are doing this as a part of our series where we read a text from cover to cover, and also in honor of Black History Month by covering a book that is not usually spoken about when we talk about great Black American autobiographies or the memoirs of revolutionaries from years past. And hopefully we're reading this text to help keep Huey P's legacy and name alive. I have only one chapter that we're going to read today because I am hella tired. School has started and I got a lot of things I need to do. So we're starting part 5 and we're only reading chapter 26 titled Trial, where Huey P is on trial for the murder of that police officer when he got pulled over with him and his friend. So we're only reading chapter 26, starting off with part 5 right here. So it starts like this. Let us go on outdoing ourselves. A revolutionary man always transcends himself, or otherwise he is not a revolutionary man. So we always do what we ask of ourselves, or more than we know we can do. Chapter 26 starts with a quote from Bobby Seale's book, Seize the Time. We knew before Huey's trial began in mid-July that the whole power structure wanted to hang Huey. We understood that William Noland, the publisher of the Oakland Tribune, the mayor, the other politicians, the DA, and the cops were all so treacherous that they would do anything to get a conviction and send Huey to the gas chamber. We asked Charles Gary a number of times what he thought would happen. He would run it down, how Huey was really innocent and how the two cops had shot each other in an attempt to kill Huey P. Newton, said by Bobby Seale's memoir or book that's about the struggle, Seize the Time, which we probably should read. We're going to continue here. Chapter 26 is titled Trial. The morning my trial began on July 15th, 1968, in the Alameda County Courthouse, 5,000 demonstrators and about 450 Black Panthers gathered outside to show their support. Busloads of demonstrators came from out of town and joined the throng that crowded the streets and sidewalks outside the courthouse. Across the street from the building, a formation of Black Panthers stood, lined up 2 deep and stretching for a solid block. At the entrance to the building, a unit of sisters from the party chanted, "Free Huey," and "Set our warrior free." In front of them, on both sides of the courthouse door, 2 party members held aloft the blue Black Panther banner with "Free Huey" emblazoned on it. Black Panther security patrols with walkie-talkie radio sets ringed the courthouse. Damn, at only 25 years old, this man had an organization that could rally 450 armed men ready to go. Continuing here. The building was under heavy guard. At every entrance and patrolling every floor, armed deputies from the sheriff's office prowled up and down, and plainclothes men were assigned positions throughout the building. On the first day, nearly 50 helmeted Oakland police stood inside the main entrance, and on the rooftop, more cops with high-powered rifles stared down into the street. The trials was conducted in the 7th floor courtroom. A small, depressing room kept ice throughout the trial. Security was so tight that the courtroom was carefully inspected before every session. Everyone, even my parents, was searched before entering. The spectators section had only about 60 seats. 2 rooms were reserved for my family. The press had 25 or so seats, and the rest was for the general public. Every morning around dawn, people began lining up outside for the few remaining places. Presiding was Superior Judge Monroe Friedman, 72-year-old, dour and humorless. Of course, no one admits prejudice, but Judge Friedman betrayed his in countless ways throughout the trial. Clearly, from the beginning, he thought I was guilty, and his sympathies lay with the prosecution. For one thing, he condescended to Black witnesses, speaking to them as if they were not capable of understanding the issues. It was obvious that he was not totally unaware of the development of Black consciousness in the past decade. Even his tone of voice was revealing. As the trial progressed, he constantly overruled my lawyer and sustained almost every objection of the prosecutor. Sometimes, when he did not like the way things were going, he looked over the prosecutor's table as if inviting an objection, which he would then sustain. On interpretation, he was extremely rigid. Whenever a legal point could not be solved by legal mechanics, he would pass it off as unimportant, thereby leaving it for some higher court to deal with or for some political statement to be made through the legislature. Nothing was considered that was not in the book. He acknowledged that some laws were good and reluctantly followed those he disliked. Never for one moment did I consider him a fair arbiter. The most critical or most crucial aspect of the trial was the jury selection. And on that first trial day, several hundred prospective jurors came to the courthouse. Charles Gary wanted a certain kind of juror, and he faced terrific odds in finding him. For one thing, everyone in the Oakland area had read or seen prejudicial accounts of the shooting. It was difficult to find anyone without an opinion about the case. Then, too, we wanted some black people. This was a vital issue and, as we learned through our investigations, a formidable hurdle to overcome. Our inquiries revealed that the assistant district attorney and prosecutor in my trial, Lowell Jensen, had developed a system whereby blacks would ostensibly be on jury panels called for duty, but would always be eliminated before they were seated in an actual trial. Under Jensen's direction, whenever a black was removed from a prospective jury for cause or through preemptory challenges, he was then returned to the jury panel and called in another trial. That way, it always appeared that blacks were an active part of the system, even though it was unlikely a black would ever serve on an actual jury. When my trial began, the routine changed. Other district attorneys in the area did not remove blacks from their jury panels. Therefore, while my trial was in session, there were juries in other courts with as many as 6 blacks on them. The party instructed Gary to use all his preemptory challenges on prospective jurors. In a capital case in the state of California, each side is allowed 20. That is, both defense and prosecution can reject 20 jurors without giving a reason. We gave Gary these instructions to demonstrate to the people that something is wrong with the trial system that defies the rights of a defendant to be tried by a true cross-section of his community. We used all our preemptory challenges to emphasize this point. The prosecution did not exhaust all theirs, since it was not hard for them to find their kind of people. Charles Gary found racism in almost every prospective jury he questioned. Shout out to Jen Jackson. Shout out to Jen Jackson up in here. We are reading Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, the memoir of the famous Black Panther, a part of the Book to React series where on my channel we read text cover to cover for the people. This is an open book club for the people because we're bringing literacy back to the people. Shout out to Gabriella 2017 MO who says hi. Shout out to Gabriella joining the live stream chat. We are continuing to read Huey P. Newton's text, Revolutionary Suicide, the 1972 memoir by the founder of the Black Panther Party. Continuing here. Selecting the jury took a long time, about 2 weeks. All in all, 3 panels of prospective jurors, about 180 people, were questioned before a jury, and 4 alternates were chosen. Out of the nearly 200 people available for my jury, there were 16 blacks, a few Orientals, and 1 or 2 Chicanos. The population of Oakland was then 38% black. The final jury consisted of 11 whites and 1 black. The black man, David Harper, actually looked enough like me to pass as a relative, although we were strangers before the trial. At the time, he was an executive in a branch of the Bank of America, but he has since become president of a black bank in Detroit. I wondered why the district attorney did not excuse him from serving. Perhaps he figured it would help his case in the appeals court to have at least 1 black on the jury. Also, he had tried to get a safe one. I figured that the district attorney saw Harper as a house hard R, if you know what I'm saying. A black bank official who had made it, so to speak. They probably thought Harper could be counted on because of his status and his ambition to go further in the white world. This is the thing. White folks think black men in jobs, black men in suits, be the safe ones. They be the house boys. Them be the angriest ones. Them be the angriest ones because we see all the slick talk and evil backbiting that the whites be doing behind closed doors in them C-suites. Yeah, yeah. The angriest ones are them brothers in them suits, for real. You know what I mean? They might be fetching and stepping and shuffling and yes sir and no mammon and all that stuff, but they be angry as hell. Trust and believe. Continuing here. Throughout the trial, I studied Harper, trying to get the measure of the man. Would he go along with the madness of the system? With a jury, it is always a guessing game. You know the judge and the prosecutor are your enemies and will do anything to keep you down. Every other paid employee in the courtroom, regardless of his color, is a slave to the system. But the jurors are something else. I watched every move Harper made, yet I could not detect where he was or where he was going. I began to wonder if the fact that he had a good job in a bank gave him satisfaction. I asked myself whether he was so blinded by the crumbs the system offered him that he would go along with the racists on the jury and a corrupt state apparatus to secure his future, or what he hoped might be his future. These questions went through my mind almost daily as the proceedings crept along. Sometimes, pondering Harper, I found myself paying no attention at all to the boring testimony of the prosecution witnesses, such as the ballistics experts. Not until I took the stand myself and began talking to the jury did I feel Harper knew his friends better than the district attorney had estimated. When I finally testified, I directed my words to Harper. He was my audience. An unspoken bond grew up between us that convinced me he not only understood, but he also agreed with me. Bravo. Bravo. Only then did I see a glimmer of hope with the jury. He was it. However, I never placed much confidence in his ability to sway the others. It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous to take the stand for yourself in an American courtroom, whether that be a state trial or a federal trial. I don't know how it works in other countries, but in the United States of America, you have the right to remain silent. If they ask you, did you commit this crime? I choose to plead my Fifth Amendment right not to perjure myself or prosecute myself or anything like that. So, the fact that Huey decided to take the stand and speak in his own defense, number one, accounts for his oratory skills, whether he likes it or not, because Huey P. said he's not a great public speaker. How much he honestly believed in his own innocence that he did not shoot those police officers, and the fact he was brave enough to do this, because I'm sure his lawyer, Mr. Gary, told him, do not take the stand, Huey, do not take the stand. This is not in your best interest. There's a reason why, Diddy didn't take the stand. If I remember right, OJ didn't take the stand. Any famous trial you've seen of a celebrity ever, they have never taken the stand to speak to their own innocence, because it's very easy for a good prosecutor to cross-examine them and get them, X'd out. Anyway, Gerondum is up in the chat. He says, I believe it in relation to angry black men in suits. Oh, yes, trust and believe it. Trust and believe it. Anyway, so, yeah, all right. Continuing here. So the prosecutor in my case was Lowell Jensen, who later became district attorney of Alameda County. Jensen is a witty and intelligent man and a worthy opponent as far as the law is concerned. He appears to have a photographic memory, and on the basis of legal knowledge alone, he is a good lawyer. In my case, he meant to get a conviction of first-degree murder, no matter how far he had to stretch the law. And to that end, he ignored the possibility that there were a number of grounds for reversal, and that in time a higher court would decide against the verdict of his trial. I repeat, in my case, he meant to get a conviction of first-degree murder no matter how far he had to stretch the law. And to that end, he ignored the possibility that there were a number of grounds for reversal and that in time, a higher court would decide against the verdict of this trial. A conviction was all he cared about. He knew that if he won his case against me, a person hated by the establishment, he would be regarded with fame and rising fortune. What would a reversal matter? A ruling by a higher court would take from 2 to 5 years, and by the time he would have achieved what he wanted, my trial was nothing more than an ego trip for him. Go into the comments. OG Kicks up in the comments. Shout out to OG Kicks. Shout out to Gerandum up in the chat. Shout out to Lillian Tortorella up in the chat as well, as we continue reading Revolutionary Suicide, the autobiography of Huey P. Newton. Shout out to NOJJW91YT. Shout out to NOJJW91YT as well. All right. Continuing here. So, throughout the trial, an unspoken game or challenge went on in the courtroom between Jensen, the judge, and myself, although a lot of people, especially the jury, knew nothing about it. The jury probably believed that the prosecutor and the judge were honorable men, with only their jobs and justice on their minds. But my lawyers and I understood the undercurrents and intangibles that were always present, difficult as they were to expose. And we knew that if the jury were aware of them, also they would see the political nature of much that went on in the courtroom. For example, we surmised from the very start of the trial that Jensen had engineered the racist system by which blacks would be on jury panels called for duty but eliminated before they could be seated for trial. And we knew that Jensen did not have justice on his mind, but wanted victory at any cost to further his own personal ambitions. There were some of the things that made the whole trial seem like a grim game with my life at stake, but a game nonetheless. In his opening statement to the jury, Jensen charged that I had murdered Officer John Frey with full intent, that I had shot Officer Herbert Haynes, and that I had kidnapped Del Ross. He said that when the first policeman stopped me, I had given him false identification, but when the second officer came up, I had correctly identified myself. Then the first officer, Frey, placed me under arrest. He claimed that when the police officer walked me back to his car, I produced a gun and began firing. According to Jensen, I shot Officer Frey with my own gun, which I pulled from inside my shirt, then took his gun and continued shooting. I was charged with shooting Officer Frey 5 times and Officer Haynes 3 times. Officer Haynes was supposed to have shot me once. After this, the prosecutor said, I escaped and forced Del Ross to take me to another part of Oakland, which sounds nonsensical because Huey would have to be a super Negro. He gets shot in the face, grabs an officer's gun, puts 5 bullets in one officer and shoots another one, and then somehow is taken down by 1 bullet, but is still able to run away and get in somebody's car and force them at gunpoint to take them to the hospital. You gotta be crazy. You gotta be crazy. Black men are not these wild, savage thugs that are just impermeable to bullets and are capable of snatching police guns and letting 5 off in them easily like that. All right? All right. So shout out to Rooney9137. Shout out to Rooney1937 up in the comment section. We are reading Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, and I appreciate everybody up in the comment section helping the content spread more because we need more people to be reading Revolutionary Suicide and other radical works by our ancestors, especially during this Black History Month when Black history is currently under attack in America and other parts of the world. Continuing here. So, the most crucial challenge facing the prosecution was to establish motivation for my alleged actions. Jensen claimed that I had 3 motives for my alleged crimes. First, he said, I had a prior conviction for a felony and was on probation. Because of this, I knew that having a concealed weapon on my person could lead to another felony conviction if the police officers found the gun on me. Second, they claimed that I had marijuana in the car and that bits of marijuana had been found in the pocket of my pants. This too could lead to another felony beef. And third, they claimed that I had given false identification to the police officer, which was a violation of the law. For these reasons, the prosecutor claimed I was so desperate to escape another felony charge that I killed an officer, wounded another, and kidnapped a citizen. As I said before, the prosecutor was willing to go to any lengths to win his case. Just straight lying on this man. Just straight lying on this man. Just straight lying. All right? All right. Continuing here. The truth of the matter is that when Frey stopped me, he knew full well who I was, as did every other policeman on the Oakland force. He tried to execute me. He tried to execute me in an urban variation of the old-style Southern lynching. My attorneys had investigated Frey's background, and they found a long history of harassing and mistreating Black people and making racist statements about Blacks and to Blacks. Unfortunately for Frey, his habits habits boomeranged that time. I do not know what happened before. I do not know what happened because I was so unconscious. But things did not work out as he wanted or expected them to. I guess he thought that if he could bring me in dead, he would be given a promotion. Look at this. Look at this. This racist ass pig ass police was calling black people all types of names. Somehow ends up getting killed while trying to murder a Black Panther, the founder of the Black Panthers, and is most likely his dumbass cop friend murdered him on accident while they were trying to do a white supremacist terrorist crime against an innocent civilian. Look at this. Look how God works. See, this is why I believe in God. And this is why I know Jesus is black. This is how I know Jesus is black. Because only black Jesus could make karma that sweet. Only black Jesus could make karma that sweet and that delicious and serve it up so cold to a racist ass police officer. He gets murdered by his own partner. God, I love it. God, I love it. Anyway, continuing here. The marijuana charge was sheer fabrication. First of all, no member of the Black Panther Party uses drugs. It is absolutely forbidden. Anyone discovered violating this rule is expelled from the party. Narcotics prohibition is part of the Black Panther principle of obeying the law to the letter. Both Charles Gary and I believe that the marijuana found in the car and in my trousers was planted there by the police. Having been stopped by members of the Oakland police force more than 50 times in the past year, why would I take the risk? Knowing that at any moment of the day or night I was liable to be thoroughly searched and my car inspected. I would never have been reckless enough to carry marijuana, even if I had wanted to use it, which I didn't. If the matchboxes really were in Laverne's car that night, there is no way of knowing how they got there. Dozens of people used her car, many of whom she knew only slightly, since they were friends of friends. But it is far more likely that the police were behaving as usual, leaving out no possibility in their determination to railroad me to jail. As for being a felon with a gun, I, of course, was not carrying a weapon, but had been out celebrating the end of my probation that night. There was no reason for me to have a gun and no reason to avoid arrest on this account, nor did I consider myself a felon. The original conviction of felony was a complicated one. Anyway, going back to the Odell Lee case in 1964. Under California law, the sentence a defendant receives determines whether he is a felon or a misdemeanant. If he is sentenced to a state prison, he is a felon. A misdemeanant usually goes to a county jail. When I was convicted of assaulting Odell Lee with a deadly weapon, I was sentenced to 3 years probation, a condition being that I serve 6 months in the county jail. This meant I was a misdemeanant. However, in my murder trial, the judge testified that I had been sentenced to the state prison and that then the sentence had been suspended. As a condition of my probation, I spent 6 months in the county jail. Technically, the state considered me a felon. In the end, this proved to be reversible error. Although I could have changed my legal status in the courts, I never petitioned because I did not consider myself a felon. This man was very brilliant. And it's so crazy how when you go into the court system in America, and this applies to white people, black people, everybody, the police, the judges, the prosecutors, lie. Just lie out of their mouths. They have no problem just straight lying just to get a conviction. Because in the court system in America, these people are career focused. The more prosecutions, the more people they can send in jail in America, doesn't matter who. It's mostly been black bodies. But even though black people have been telling white folks, you need to reform this criminal justice system because it's not only fucking over us, it's going to fuck over you one day too. These court systems are fucking over everybody, trying to get everybody convicted. Because these people are focused on moving up in their careers. It could be the district attorney, the state attorney, the judge. Hell, even some of the public defenders don't give a fuck because if you're prosecuted, they'll even find a way to climb up the ladder too. It's all about moving up in rank. Bodies are just ways to move up in rank in the criminal justice system in America, and that's a problem. That's a problem. That's what Huey is pointing out here. These people will just straight lie on you to send you to jail, to a for-profit prison that the white man built for niggas, but now they're arresting them crack-ass crackers too. They don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck. They want to throw as many poor people behind bars as possible in for-profit prison America. Continuing here. But the prosecution did and planned its whole case around the point. Not only did they want to show I would commit murder to avoid arrest, but they also wanted to take advantage of the fact that a felon's testimony can be discredited and he can receive a severer sentence. Despite Charles Gary's objections and arguments, Judge Friedman ruled that I had been convicted of a felony in 1964, and this charge against me was added to the other three. This question of the Odell Lee conviction came up repeatedly during the trial, since the prosecution needed to establish a motive. Eventually, when I testified, I told the jury again that I had not considered myself a felon. It was actually a ridiculous basis for motivation, since I had dozens of witnesses who saw me out celebrating on the night of October 27th, a fact which proved beyond doubt that I had no reason to resist arrest as a felon. When my trial was just beginning, Eldridge Cleaver put out a leaflet that was widely distributed in the black community. In it, he charged that the police, with murder on their minds, have violated the territorial integrity of the black community, and that I had dealt with their transgression in a necessary way. Oh no, Eldridge, no. The leaflet went on to say that black people are justified in killing all policemen who do this. Eldridge, no. Behind Eldridge's message lay the inference that I had killed a police officer even though I had not. Damn, Eldridge, what the fuck, bruh? Anyway, the leaflet could not have been used against me in the courts. Even so, my family was very upset over it, and they protested strongly to Eldridge. They felt he cared little about me and that he was, in effect, trying to gas me. I told them, as gently as I could, not to interfere with anything Eldridge or other party members did during the trial, because such actions could not be brought into the legal proceedings. As far as I was concerned, Eldridge was free to write and mobilize the community by any means necessary. I supported him in that. Issuing the leaflet was a political act using the trial to heighten the consciousness of the community. I was willing to go along with party actions in the interest of educating the people, mobilizing the community, and taking the contradictions to a higher level. After that, my family did not interfere with political activities. The trial caused much grief and worry to my family. They wanted to save me, but I felt death was ahead. And my main concern was the community, because my family continued to hope. I could not tell them this, however, and I was very moved by their faith and support. In fact, the only strain I felt during the trial was the pull between trying to comfort my family and carrying out the political activities I knew were necessary. It has all worked out for the best now, but at the time, it was a tremendous weight on my family and on me. All right. Shout out to Gerandom up in the chat, leaving a beautiful comment. Learning is for everybody. Absolutely. That's why we do these live streams, reading these texts, reading books with the people. I encourage you all to start reading. You know what I mean? Turn that TV off. Turn that TV off, as Kendrick Lamar says. Now let's get back to this beautiful book by Huey P. Newton, Revolutionary Suicide. So, another matter of concern was whether to reveal to my attorneys the name of Gene McKinney, my passenger on the night the incident went down. Gene had never been apprehended by the police, despite a diligent search. What is more, they did not even know his name. From the start, the police had cleared Gene, and Haynes had testified before the grand jury that my companion had not taken part in any violence. Right after I was captured, the police sent broadcasts all through California saying that they had apprehended the guilty party, and they wanted the passenger to come in for questioning. They repeatedly said in these broadcasts that the passenger had nothing to do with the incident. I suspected that they wanted to use him against me, and at first I refused to give his name to my attorneys. I saw no point in involving Gene, even though I knew his testimony might help free me. Only when my lawyers had convinced me that legally the prosecution could not do anything to him did I agree to reveal Gene's identity. From my own knowledge of the law, I became aware that the courts were powerless to hurt him. However, Gene was skeptical. When my lawyers finally met him, they explained very carefully that he could not be hurt by testifying for the defense, and he did eventually testify despite his doubts. This showed supreme courage on his part, because the prosecutors were not above pulling some tricks to involve him. The prosecution took about 3 weeks to present its case and called about 20 witnesses to the stand. They included people like the nurse who had admitted me at Kaiser Hospital, the doctor who did the autopsy on Officer Frey, ballistics experts from the police department, various policemen who arrived at the scene of the shooting, and so on. But their three most important witnesses were Patrolman Haynes, Henry Greer, the bus driver who allegedly witnessed the shooting, and Del Ross, who claimed that McKinney and I kidnapped him. The first of these to testify was Herbert Haynes. When Officer Haynes took the witness stand, it soon became apparent that he was a very disturbed man, like most police officers are, very disturbed. Wife abusers, alcoholics, just all around miscreants. There's no such thing as a good personality type that becomes a police officer. You gotta be fucked up. You gotta be a fucked up person to choose to be a police officer. Disgusting. Disgusting human beings. Continuing here. He told of recurring dreams in which the Black Panthers were attacking him. Haynes is not very bright, and as time and again he had trouble keeping his story straight. The impression grew that he was completely confused. The prosecutor had obviously rehearsed him, but Haynes was so tense that he made mistakes. With each mistake, he dropped his head as if to say, "I'll try the script over again." He was no good at all at improvisation and reconciling contradictions in his testimony. Haynes testified that after Frey ordered me out of the car, the two of us walked to Haynes' patrol car parked behind Laverne's Volkswagen, while he, Haynes, remained near the front door of Frey's patrol car, about 30 feet away from us. As Frey and I reached the rear of Haynes' car, Haynes testified that I turned around and started shooting, and that Frey and I then started to tussle on the trunk of his car. At this point, Haynes said he was shot in the right arm, whereupon he switched his gun to his left hand. Immediately after this, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that the passenger in my car, McKinney, had gotten out of the Volkswagen and was standing on the car with his arms up in the air. Haynes turned his gun on him, but after the passenger assured him he was not armed, Haynes turned back to Frey and me. By this time, Haynes said Frey and I separated, although Frey was still hanging onto me, and he, Haynes, shot at my stomach as I faced him. He did not say that he saw his bullet hit me, only that he fired at my midsection. After that, Haynes said he remembered only two things. First, sending out a 940B, the police emergency number, over the police radio, and second, seeing two men run into the darkness. When Gary cross-examined Haynes after his testimony, many contradictions and unanswered questions emerged. Haynes repeatedly stated that he never saw a gun in my hand, yet he testified that I had turned around and started to shoot. How's that? How dumb? This is what I'm saying. There are no smart people who become police. You're saying this person turned around and started shooting at you. You would know if he had a gun in his hand. Make it make sense. This is what this dumbass police officer said on the stand. He said, I saw him turn around and start shooting at me. Did he have a gun in his hand? I don't know. Dumb, just stupid. This is why they're pigs. This is why they are pigs. Just dumbasses and liars. Liars, liars. Anyway, when Gary, Huey P. Newton's lawyer, cross-examined Haynes after his testimony, many contradictions and unanswered questions emerged. Haynes repeatedly stated that he never saw a gun in my hand, yet he testified that I had turned around and started to shoot. He was never able to say who had shot him in the arm, although when he shot me in the stomach, he said I was facing him. He would not state that I had shot him, even though as a police officer, he is supposedly trained to observe such facts as whether or not a suspect has a gun. He was confused in his descriptions of what McKinney was wearing. Some of his testimony contradicted the description given later by Henry Greer, the bus driver. Perhaps the greatest weakness of his testimony, which Gary skillfully brought to the jury's attention, was that Haynes had turned his back on McKinney, having only McKinney's word that he was unarmed. Since the Oakland police distrusted and hated all Black Panthers, and since McKinney, who was unknown to Haynes and who was riding with the Black Panther Minister of Defense, could very well have been a Black Panther, why had he let himself so unprotected, particularly since he said he did not know where all the shots were coming from? As Gary suggested in his cross-examination of Haynes, It was probably because Haynes was more worried about what Frey would do. Among the police, Frey was known to need watching in the black community. He was even worse than the normal cop, which made him extremely dangerous. It was clear from Haynes' testimony and the way he had been coached by the prosecutor that great pains had been taken to avoid any implication that Frey and Haynes had shot each other. Charles Gary's first question on cross-examination dealt with this. Did you shoot and kill Officer Frey? Haynes said, no. Yet several facts pointed that way, and Haynes' evasions were not helpful to the prosecution. For instance, Haynes made a point of saying that he fired at me only when Frey and I broken apart after our struggle on the car. A more damaging piece of evidence came from the ballistics section of the police department itself. The expert who testified concluded that the bullet that had hit both Frey and Haynes came from police revolvers. They were lead bullets, not copper-jacketed, as were the two 9mm casings found on the ground at the scene of the shooting. This damaged the prosecution's case because Jensen had maintained from the beginning that I had shot Haynes and Frey with my own .38 pistol, whose bullets would have matched the 9mm casings found on the ground. Of course, this mythical gun was never found. More evidence that the police are lying, just making it up. Shell casings don't match the gun that is supposedly Huey had, though the police said they never saw him have it in his hand. Anyway, all in all, Haynes' testimony did little for the prosecution. He became even more muddled during my second trial, and by the time he appeared at the third trial, he found it impossible to deal with his own inconsistencies. It was then that he broke down on the stand and admitted seeing a third party at the scene of the shooting. Okay, he's just a dumbass. This police officer was stupid as fuck. Up there just straight up lying, and then starts crying. Then goes on the stand and just starts crying like, I don't know what I said. I don't know who shot me. Well, I know what to say to that. I know what to say to him. A big crying police officer. Who shot you? Separate the weak from the obsolete. It's on, nigga. Fuck all that bickering beef. I can smell the sweat trickling down your cheek. I'm sorry. Anyway. Gonna continue here. He found it impossible to deal with his own consistencies. It was then that he broke down on the stand and admitted seeing a third party at the scene of the shooting. But even at my first trial, his testimony was too vague and inconsistent to be taken seriously. The testimony of Henry Greer, a black man and the next major witness for the prosecution, was therefore all important. He was the only person besides Haynes who claimed I had a gun at the scene of the shooting. Greer was a bus driver for the Alameda Contra Costa Transit System in Oakland. According to his testimony, he had been driving his bus along 7th Street shortly after 5 a.m. on the morning of October 28, 1967. When he stopped his vehicle and under its bright lights witnessed the shooting of Frey and Haynes from a distance of about 10 feet or less. Asked by Jensen to identify the gunman, Greer left the stand, walked over to where I sat with my attorneys, and put his hand on my shoulder. When he testified for the first time on the afternoon of August 7th, 1968, a feeling of disgust for him overwhelmed me. He was obviously a bought man who had sold out from terror of the white power structure, and perhaps because the district attorney had promised him a few handouts. My attorneys also had reason to suspect, after investigation, that he was in some kind of trouble with his job or the law, and only by cooperating with the district attorney's office could he get out of his predicament. Yet, as the first trial wore on, my feelings of disgust turned to pity. He was, after all, a brother. As a black man, I understood he was coerced into selling his integrity for survival, and I knew he would have been disgusted. He would have been disgusting to himself. After the first trial, I felt Greer would not be able to live with himself. But when he came back and did it twice again, in the second and third trials, I realized he had been totally destroyed as a person, too corrupt even to feel shame. He was a complete mystery to me. It is an indication of Greer's importance to the prosecution that Charles Gary learned of his existence only on August 1st, 6 days before he appeared on the witness stand. On August 1st, jury selection had been completed, and under the rules of the court, the prosecution was required to give the defense the names and addresses of all the witnesses it intended to call during the trial. It was on this day that Gary first saw Greer's name and learned who he was. During the entire 9 months of preparation for the trial, Jensen had seen to it that Greer was kept completely out of sight and never mentioned. He did not appear before the grand jury in all the police reports. In all the official statements that were issued covering every detail of the incident, the name of the most important witness to the shooting was withheld. Jensen had carried out his Machiavellian tactics with supreme cunning. Only when it was no longer possible to hide Greer did Gary learn of his identity and that he claimed to have witnessed the incident. At the time my lawyers received the prosecution list with Greer's name on it, they were also given another staggering piece of evidence, a transcript of a recorded conversation between Greer and Police Inspector Frank McConnell, which took place at the Oakland Police Station only 90 minutes after the shooting on October 28th. The police had brought Greer to the station house for a statement almost immediately after the incident, and in it he described everything he had allegedly seen. He also identified me as the gunman from a photograph in the police files that Inspector McConnell showed him. When my attorneys read Greer's statement given to the police while everything was still fresh in his mind, we learned why the police and prosecution had hidden him away. If Charles Gary had had a chance to talk to him earlier, he would have convinced Greer in a very short time that this eyewitness account of the shooting would never stand up in court. First of all, Greer did not make a statement to the police. His interview at the police station was a classic case of verbal entrapment. The inspector led Greer, who was not only weak but also in many instances unsure of everything he had seen, and fed him the questions that would produce answers the police wanted. Whenever Greer hesitated or stopped while trying to remember what he had seen, Inspector McConnell put words in his mouth or suggested the way things had happened. Then Greer would agree. But serious as this was, some of Greer's most crucial statements were so damaging to the prosecution's case, it seems incredible that Jensen was willing to gamble everything on him as a principal witness. The fact that Greer swore I had a gun in my hand must have affected Jensen's judgment concerning the rest of Greer's testimony. First, in describing the gunman whom he later identified as me, Greer said he was no taller than 5 feet, sort of a pee-wee type you might call him, were his exact words to Inspector McConnell. Since I am 5 feet 10 and a half inches, okay, Huey, you need to stop with that half. Stop with that half. Since I am 5 feet 10 and a half inches, Greer's impression of my height was wildly inaccurate. He also said I was wearing a black shirt, a light tan jacket, and that I was clean shaven. The police had kept all the clothing I was wearing that night, and it was a matter of record that I wore a black jacket, a white shirt, and had 2 weeks' growth of beard. This was confirmed by a close-up photograph taken by the police when I was lying on the gurney at Kaiser Hospital. Then, too, many of the things Greer said in the transcript were at variance with Officer Haynes's depiction of what took place. Greer told Inspector McConnell that he had first come upon the scene while driving his bus westbound on 7th Street. As he approached Willow Avenue on 7th, directly across from the construction site of a new post office, he said he observed 2 parked police cars and near them 2 policemen and 2 civilians standing in the street. It was Greer's impression that the police were probably giving the 2 civilians a ticket or making a routine check, and so he thought little of it as he continued west to the end of his run. This contradicted the testimony of Haynes, who said that the second passenger, McKinney, had remained in the Volkswagen until after he, Haynes, was shot. Greer related how he went to the end of his route, turned around, and began his eastbound run back along 7th Street, picking up 3 passengers on his way. When he got back to where the police cars were, he said he arrived at the moment Frey and I were walking toward one of the police cars, with Officer Haynes walking behind us. Haynes had testified that he stayed behind Frey's car as we walked toward the other police car and had not accompanied us. At this point, Greer said, while Frey was walking beside me, I reached into my jacket, pulled out a gun, and fired at Haynes, who was walking behind me. Haynes fell to the ground. By this time, Greer told McConnell he had stopped the bus about 30 or 40 yards away from us. Then, he continued, Frey and I began wrestling, and he heard a second shot. He reached for the phone in his bus to call the central dispatcher of the transit system, and when he looked again, Frey had fallen on his back and was standing over him and firing 3 or 4 more shots at him while he lay on his back on the ground. The next thing he knew, said Greer, I had turned and fled west, and within minutes, people and police were arriving at the scene from every direction. He told Inspector McConnell that he had not seen the second civilian after he first passed the four of us on his eastbound trip. During that shooting, the man was nowhere to be seen. According to Greer's testimony, Haynes had testified that McKinney was standing near the curb with his hands in the air. By the way, I know this is not the most interesting chapter, and thank God we're only going to be reading this chapter today, because if you're like me, I'm not that interested in courtroom drama. I know Huey is writing this chapter for the record because, you know, the white power establishment will say forever that Huey P. Newton was a police killer, that he was a cop killer, right? He was a murderer. He was a criminal and stuff like that. But he is going into great detail in his memoir, from my perspective, to clear his name for history. Because 100 years from now, 200 years from now, when they're reading about Huey P. Newton, they are going to be using his own words for his own defense. You know what I mean? Because, you know, take it or leave it, the white power structure is going to continue to try to malign and disparage Huey P. Newton's name. But not only was he cleared in the court of law of murder, he also has to clear his name in public opinion. And that's why he's writing this chapter. Though, to keep it real, for me, it's a snooze fest. I'm going to keep it real because I'm not that much into courtroom drama. But continuing here in the comment section, Jevin Schonenbaum is in the chat. Shout out to Jevin Schonenbaum up in the chat. We are reading Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, and we're almost finished with chapter 26. As soon as Gary and my other attorneys read this transcript and received Greer's name and address on August 1st, they tried to get in touch with him. He did not appear at work for the next 6 days. They called his home over and over again, but could never reach him. A recorded message said that the number was out of order. For 6 days, a constant vigil was maintained outside his home. No one was there, and neither he nor any member of his family could be found. Greer had simply disappeared. None of my lawyers laid eyes on Henry Greer until he walked into the courtroom on August 7th to testify for the prosecution. On the afternoon, his name had been given to the defense. Greer had been taken into protective custody by the district attorney's office and secretly installed in the Lake Merritt Hotel in downtown Oakland, completely unavailable for questioning by the defense. When Greer finally appeared, Gary had only a matter of hours to prepare his cross-examination on the basis of prosecution testimony. However, he had 6 days to go over Greer's sworn statement to Inspector McConnell, enough time to discredit totally Greer's statements on the witness stand, because, unbelievably, Greer changed a lot of his earlier testimony under questioning by Jensen. At this point, the jury had not read the transcript of Greer's sworn statement to Inspector McConnell. And so, when Jensen put Greer on the stand on August 7th, the jurors were hearing for the first time Greer's accounts of the shooting. Jensen handled his testimony very slickly, emphasizing particularly that part in which Greer said, "I pulled a gun from inside my shirt, shot at Haynes, and then shot and killed Frey," standing over him and firing 3 or 4 more shots into his body. When Greer walked over and identified me, the jury must have been convinced of my guilt, for Greer was a calm, assured witness. But Jensen made a crucial mistake. He thought he could get away with the inconsistencies between Greer's statements made an hour and a half after the shooting and what Jensen coached him to say on the stand. He had Greer tell the jury that he was less than 10 feet away from the participants in the shooting, whereas in his sworn statement to McConnell, Greer had said he was 30 or 40 yards away. He told the jury in the courtroom that I had reached into my shirt for my gun, but in the original statement, he had said I had reached into the pocket of my jacket or coat to get it. Greer testified during the trial that Frey fell forward, face down, while he had told McConnell that Frey fell on his back. On the stand, Greer claimed that the bus lights were shining directly on the scene and he could see plainly, but he had told McConnell that he could not tell how old the gunman was because he had his head down and he couldn't get a good look. He told Jensen on the stand that I had fled toward the post office construction site, but when McConnell had asked him if that was where I was headed when he had last seen me, Greer said no, that I was running northwest toward a gas station. So basically, Huey P. Newton is saying this black man that they brought in, who was a bus driver, who obviously wanted to keep his job or stay out of trouble, was coached to lie on Huey P. Newton on the stand. He was coached to lie on Huey P. Newton's situation, and it's all falling apart upon cross-examination. It took only about 3.5 hours of cross-examination for Charles Gary to demolish Greer's credibility. In his examination of him and in his final summation, Gary showed that there were at least 15 crucial statements in which Greer's two sworn testimonies were in conflict. For a while, Gary said to the jury near the end of the trial, "I thought Mr. Greer was making an honest mistake. I really thought that for a long time, but I've now come to the conclusion that this man was either deliberately lying or that he is a psychopath and that he can't be depended upon in relating any kind of facts. As far as Huey Newton is concerned, either choice is deadly." In his cross-examination of Greer, Gary first demonstrated that there had been absolutely no reason for his having been taken into protective custody. Over the strenuous objections of Jensen, who constantly leaped up and called Gary's questions incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial, Gary got Greer to admit that not only had the district attorney's office never told him why he was being taken into custody, but also that Greer himself had always felt perfectly safe, had never been threatened, and had never felt a need for any protection. This was an effective beginning because it showed the jury that the trial was being conducted by a ruthless prosecutor who had denied the defense lawyers their legal right to question a prospective witness. Then Gary proceeded to develop this masterly strategy to expose Greer's fraudulence. He had him describe all over again in the same words the story he had told the jury for the prosecution. Gary wanted the jury to understand very clearly what was happening. The jury was still unaware of Greer's first statement to McConnell. When Greer had finished, Gary took off. He demonstrated in one instance after another all the discrepancies in Greer's two stories. This is how his cross-examination went at one point. Gary, how was the civilian dressed? Greer, well, sir, he had on a dark jacket and a light shirt. As a matter of fact, sir, didn't that civilian have on a dark shirt and a light tan jacket? No, sir. I want you to think about this before you answer it. I am going to ask you again, isn't it a fact that the person you have described as the civilian was a person who had a dark shirt on, a black shirt on, and a light tan jacket? Silence. Gary, a light tan jacket? Greer, no, sir, it was dark. Judge Friedman, what was the answer? Greer, dark. Judge Friedman, dark what? Greer, the outer garment was dark. Gary, how tall was that civilian? Greer, from up in the coach, sir, to look down at an angle like that, I wouldn't dare say, sir. Gary, isn't it a fact that the civilian was under 5 feet? Greer, I do not know, sir. Gary, would you say that the civilian was heavy-set, thin, or otherwise? Greer, I didn't pay that close attention, counselor. Gary, Mr. Greer, do you know that you are under oath, do you not? Greer, I do, sir, I do. Jensen, object to that as being argumentative, Your Honor. Gary, Mr. Greer, you made a statement to Inspector McConnell on the 28th day of October 1967 at the hour of 6:30 a.m. Greer, that's right, sir. Gary, and in that statement, didn't you tell Inspector McConnell that the person that was involved was under 5 feet? Greer, I could have, sir. Gary, did you or did you not say so? Greer, I don't recall making any specific statements, sir, as to the facts, sir. At this point, the court adjourned for the day. Next morning, Thursday, August 8th, in the absence of the jury, Gary made 2 motions for a mistrial. The first was based on the evidence that the prosecution had hidden a witness from the defense. We found out for the first time yesterday, said Gary to Judge Freeman, that immediately after these documents were given to us and the list of witnesses, that the prosecution immediately took this man out of circulation to a point we did not know where he was under the guise of so-called protective custody. He was put into the Hotel Merit, and we didn't find this out until he was on the stand yesterday afternoon. Our motion is based upon the grounds that the prosecution has gone out of its way to circumvent the right and the obligation and the duty of the defense to prepare its case and to present it in a serious case as this one is. I feel hamstrung. I feel tied up, and I'm asking the court for relief. Jensen immediately responded that if Gary had wanted to talk to any witness, he should have come to the district attorney's office the following day and talked to him there. I have a right to see the witnesses under my own circumstances and my own conditions. I spent hours and hours of investigation time trying to locate this man, and all the time he had him under wraps, Gary replied. Then he went on to present his second motion for a mistrial. My second motion is based upon the atmosphere of the courthouse. I feel impelled to call to the court's attention that the entire courthouse, as you walk in through the front door, is permeated and surrounded by deputies of the Alameda County Sheriff's Department and other police agencies, making it embarrassing and insulting, and has, in my opinion, a direct bearing and effect on the jury itself. In this particular case, under these circumstances, I feel impelled to call to the court's attention that we don't feel we can get a fair trial with the jury walking through these same doors, with bailiffs finding out who they are and what they are doing in the building and this kind of atmosphere. And for that same reason, I'm going to renew a motion for mistrial. Judge Freeman, motion is denied. Bring the jury down. With that, the jury returned, and Gary resumed his cross-examination of Henry Greer. Gary, Mr. Greer, isn't it a fact that you first saw this officer and this civilian walking alongside of each other, as you have described it, when your bus was at least 30 to 35 yards from the scene? Greer, I did not, sir. Gary, reading from the transcript. And then I noticed, as I approached, I saw the officer walking, one guy towards the second patrol car, and this guy was short, sort of a small-built fellow. He, just as I approached within 30 or 40 yards of it, I noticed the man begins going into his jacket. You gave that answer to Inspector McConnell on that hour of the morning, did you not, sir? Greer, I did, sir. Gary, Mr. Greer, this man was under 5 feet, isn't that right? Would you answer that question either yes or no? I don't know, counselor, said Greer. Gary, reading from the transcript. Question, and how tall would you say he was? Answer, no more 5 feet. Question, very short? Answer, very short. You gave that answer, did you not, at the time? Greer, I did. Gary, Mr. Greer, how much did this man weigh? Greer, I don't know. Gary, in your estimation. Greer, I don't know, counselor. Gary, reading from the transcript. About how much would you say he weighed? Oh, 125 pounds. Just straight lying. Just straight lying. Can't keep his story straight. Did you give that answer to the question? I could have, counselor, said Greer. Gary, was this fellow, this man that you saw on that morning, was this fellow a husky fellow or a thin person or a medium person or what? Greer, medium, I would say. As a matter of fact, the person you have described was a little pee-wee fellow, isn't that right? Greer, he was not, sir. Gary, reading from the transcript. Was he heavy, husky? No. Question, slender? Sort of pee-wee type fellow, you might call him. Isn't that right, that you have said? Greer, I could have, counselor. That is what you did say, isn't it, sir? Greer, possibility, yes. I could have said that, yes, sir. Gary, not possibility. That is exactly what you did say, isn't it, sir? As I said before, counselor, without any mistake, I could have. Gary, it was the truth, wasn't it, sir? Greer, it was, sir. After this, and while Jensen registered his disapproval, Gary read to the jury the entire transcript of Greer's statement to Inspector McConnell. There could be no question in the juror's mind then that something was suspicious, if not rotten, about the prosecution's star witness. Gary's most dramatic refutation of Greer's testimony, and the one that went to the heart of the matter, came during his final summary for the defense. He walked over to the table in the courtroom where all the evidence for the trial was on display and picked up the black leather jacket I had been wearing on October 28th. Then he picked up Haynes's .38 revolver and walked over to the jury box. Standing before the jurors, he quoted Greer's original statement that I had gone into my jacket or coat pocket and pulled out a gun. The gun that the prosecution claimed I had hidden, a .38 pistol, could not have been much smaller than Haynes's revolver. Gary said, as he put the gun in the jacket pocket, it immediately fell out. He put it into the other pocket, and it fell out again. He tried putting the gun in the pocket several times, and each time it fell out. The pocket was too small to hold it. He reminded the jury again of Greer's statement. And if this isn't a diabolical lie, he said. Then I don't know what a lie is. That's the reason that he changed it from his coat to his shirt. Could it be doctored in any more fashionable way? Try it. This is a shallow pocket. It's about 3½ inches deep. That's why his testimony was changed. And it was changed with the condemnation and the knowledge of the prosecution in this case to get a conviction. On Monday morning, August 12th, Del Ross, accompanied by his own lawyer, arrived at court to testify for the prosecution. At this point, Jensen needed him desperately. The first two major witnesses, Haynes and Greer, had not been as strong as he had hoped. Ross was his last chance. Del Ross had testified before the grand jury in November 1967 that right after the shooting, I had jumped into his car with another man and forced him at gunpoint to flee the scene. He was the second person to claim I had a gun in my hand. The kidnapping charge was important too, since it demonstrated that I knew I had committed a crime and was using desperado tactics to escape. Ross had told the grand jury that I had jumped into the back seat of his car and my companion had gotten into the front. At first, he said he had refused to drive us to the corner of 32nd and Chestnut as we requested. But when I pulled a gun on him, he complied. He testified that I had said to him, I just shot 2 dudes, and I'd have kept shooting if my gun hadn't jammed. When a picture of me was shown to him, Ross identified me as the man with the gun. When Jensen put him on the stand on August 12th, he had no reason to suspect that Ross would not repeat all his grand jury testimony. Ross answered his first few questions about where he lived, whether he had owned a car in October 1967, and what make it was, etc., etc. But when Jensen asked him where he had been at 5 o'clock on the morning of October 28th, Ross would not tell him. I refused to answer on the grounds it would tend to incriminate me, he said. Jensen could not believe his ears. He asked the court reporter to read the answer back to him, as if to reassure himself of what he had just heard. Ross was a prosecution witness. Moreover, he was a victim, not a defendant, and victims do not take the Fifth Amendment. When Ross persisted in refusing to answer, Jensen became furious. From his point of view, Ross's insistence on not answering could damage his case seriously and result in bad publicity. It would look as if something fishy was going on, which of course it was, and put the district attorney's office in an unfavorable light. He appealed to Judge Friedman, asking that the witness be obligated to respond to his questions, pointing out that he had already testified fully on the case before the grand jury 9 months before. At this point, the judge ordered the jury to retire from the courtroom. Ross's lawyer argued that Ross was making a personal claim for his own protection under the Fifth Amendment. He pointed out that questions put to Ross during the trial might well go beyond the factual answers he had given to the grand jury and lead to further questions that could incriminate him. Ross's lawyer suggested that Ross perhaps knew more about what had happened on the morning of October 28th than he had told the grand jury. Here was a dilemma for both the prosecutor and judge. Judge Friedman responded by cutting short the proceedings for that day. The next day, he granted Ross immunity and told him he could not be prosecuted for anything that arose out of his testimony, except perjury or contempt for failing to answer questions directed at him. Now Ross had to answer Jensen's questions and could no longer invoke the Fifth Amendment. But when the prosecutor began all over again and asked the same question, Ross had refused to answer the previous day, where he had been at 5 a.m. on October 28, 1967. Ross again refused to answer on the grounds that it would incriminate him. The judge became totally exasperated and told him that he must now answer the questions since he had immunity. Otherwise, he would go to jail for contempt. Ross just sat there stolidly, refusing to go on. Just as Judge Friedman was preparing to sentence him for contempt, Jensen suddenly realized what he could do with this intransigent witness in order to save the day for the prosecution. Mr. Ross, he asked him, do you remember what happened on the morning of October 28, 1967? Ross stalled. Judge Friedman was quick to interject. If you don't remember what happened that morning, he said, why, you should say you don't remember. The court does not desire to force you into anything. Is it perhaps that you don't remember what happened that morning? Ross agreed that he couldn't remember. It was incredible to see the way the judge aided Jensen. What they planned to do was clear. The judge chose to point out that a witness cannot be punished for having a faulty memory. And so the prosecution was going to help Ross remember by reading back to him all his grand jury testimony, which ordinarily is never allowed as evidence in a trial. Charles Gary protested strongly, but Judge Friedman was adamant. Jensen read all Ross's testimony back to him in front of the jury, and it went into the official record of the trial. Now, that's just ridiculous. They're cheating. The prosecution and the judge are literally cheating, working hand in hand to try to get Huey in jail by having them read the grand jury testimony, which usually is not entered into the official trial. People who claim to be witnesses of the alleged crime are asked to come forward and actually say and testify to what they saw. And here they have a witness who refuses to do that. So what they do is just take what he said before in the secret closed jury system and have him read it back. Just wicked. They're working together. They're collaborating. It's a conspiracy. Anyway, never was Judge Friedman's bias in favor of Jensen more blatantly obvious than in his dealings with Del Ross as a witness. It was typical of the arbitrary way the trial was conducted. When their man would not testify because of self-incrimination, they gave him immunity so that anything he could say not be used against him. Then the judge actually coaxed Ross into saying he could not remember what he had said before the grand jury so that the prosecution had an excuse to read his testimony into the transcript. On the other hand, when our man, Gene McKinney, refused to testify 12 days later because of self-incrimination, they did not offer him immunity or coax him in any way. They just threw him into jail. The police had already exonerated McKinney of any involvement in the incident, but they still would not offer him immunity to protect himself. This was the only time that the contradiction between justice and what the judge and prosecution were doing came out in open court. Their people got immunity when they knew their testimony would incriminate them. Our people, who had been exonerated but who did not trust the system anyway, got tossed into jail. The whole trial was nothing but a big charade to get me railroaded into the gas chamber. Just wicked, man. And it's so crazy to see that Huey is actually going through all this, because this is enough to break a man. You know what I'm saying? This is some serious stuff that he's going through. I could not imagine be in a trial, fighting for my life, about to face the gas. You know what I mean? The electric chair, the firing squad, however they were doing it in California at that time, and just, have to sit there and watch these people collaborate to take my life. You know what I mean? That's just unimaginable torture. Unimaginable torture. But Huey was a man's man for real. And he stood in the face of all that oppression and took it and faced it head on and didn't flinch or budge. You know what I'm saying? And here he is giving his living testimony after suffering through all of that. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And once again, this is not my favorite chapter because, I'm not a big fan of all of this courtroom drama, he said, she said, all that stuff. But I understand it's very important, okay? I understand it's very important that this was written down for the record, okay? And let's go here. There's a lot of this chapter left. You know what I'm saying? I think we're about halfway through. We're going to continue to try to push and persevere to get it all done. Okay. All right. We're going to see back up here. Yeah. All right. Let's go here. All right. Quick water break. All right. But all their chicanery to get Del Ross's testimony came to nothing in the end because Charles Gary had called the last trump. 2 weeks before the trial, he had interviewed Ross in his office and taped the conversation, during the course of which Ross admitted that he had lied to the grand jury. He had gone along with the authorities, he said, because they had warrants out for him for parking violations, and he was afraid of them. Ross told Gary in this interview that I did not have a gun that night, that I was barely conscious and had said nothing at all to him. Of course, when Gary got up to cross-examine him during the trial, Ross could not remember this interview either, so Gary played the whole tape in court over Jensen's vehement objections. As a result, the kidnapping charge against me was dropped for lack of evidence, and I was now being tried on 3 counts instead of 4. Ross's appearance as a witness for the prosecution had been a complete failure, yet it was brought back for my second and third trials, and both times he repudiated his position during the first trial. Despite this, I felt no anger toward him. Like Greer, he was a crushed and broken man, pathetically terrified of the power of the state. I felt more angry at the prosecution for using him as a dupe of the state than against Ross, who could not defend himself. Ross was the last important witness that Jensen produced, and after he appeared, the prosecution rested his case. In any trial, the burden of proof lies with the prosecution to establish beyond reasonable doubt the evidence of guilt. Jensen had not achieved this. Many of the accusations were made through implication and innuendo, not facts. Despite his single-minded determination to place me at the scene with the gun in my hand, a lot of his evidence had backfired in ways he had not anticipated. In addition to weaknesses in the testimony of both Greer and Haynes, and the fact that their 2 stories did not jive at crucial points, there were a number of serious flaws and omissions in the prosecutor's case. Jensen never dealt satisfactorily with the shooting. For instance, the location of the 2 9mm casings that were found at the scene by police officers. Jensen had suggested throughout the trial that these casings, which did not match police guns, belonged to the .38 revolver I allegedly carried that night. The casings were found lying 20 to 25 feet apart, one between the 2 police vehicles and one near the rear left fender of Haynes's car, right where Frey was shot. Since both Haynes and Greer's testimony coincided in stating that Frey and I had walked to the back of Haynes's car and that no shooting had occurred until we reached this point. How could the second casing have gotten 25 feet away? I could not have been in 2 places at once. This was an insurmountable puzzle in the prosecution argument. The only possible solution seems to be that a third person was firing at the scene, and the prosecution had totally excluded this possibility since it wanted only one assailant, me. Y'all, they should have been looking for that grassy knoll. Then, too, my lawyers found the police tapes from that morning. Very mystifying. They carefully went over the transcripts of all the police conversations that were recorded between the police cars at the scene and radio dispatch in the police administration building. The tapes began with a request from Officer Frey just after he had stopped me shortly before 5 a.m. The request was for information about me and the car I was driving. They continued through all the communications that took place after other police cars arrived at the scene following the shooting. In analyzing the messages that passed between radio dispatch and the patrol car radios, my lawyers found indications that the police dispatcher in the Oakland area the police dispatcher in the administration building was sending out information to other police in the Oakland area that was not being radioed in by the police at the scene. This suggested that either the tape was tampered with or that witnesses were phoning in accounts of the shooting and giving descriptions that the police at the scene did not have. For instance, the dispatcher assumed that I was connected with the crime since Frey had asked information about me before he was shot, and so he sent out a bulletin about 5:15 a.m. Describing me as a suspect and stating that I was wearing a tan jacket. Half an hour later, he inexplicably sent out another bulletin that I was wearing dark clothing. There had been no incoming police radio message on the tape to tell him this, and no indication of how he got this information. How did he learn that I was wearing dark clothing? Henry Greer, too, had mentioned in his interview with Inspector McConnell a Pee-wee type wearing a tan jacket. Was there a third person answering this description at the scene? Throughout the trial, Jensen never allowed this possibility to be suggested to the jury, even though the police had interviewed witnesses who had heard shots and arrived at the scene seconds after the shooting. My lawyers even suspect that a number of people in the area were close and had witnessed the incident. One woman, a black prostitute, told the police that she had seen 3 men running away at the direction of the gas station at the corner of 7th Street and Willow Avenue. him. Another witness, a young man, told the police that he had seen two cars speeding away north on 7th Street. Jensen never called these people to testify because he wanted to create the impression that I was the only person who could possibly have killed Frey. Yet the accounts of others who were there, and later Haynes' own admission at my third trial that there had been a third person present, contradicted his theory. Another piece of evidence that Jensen found hard to dismiss was the law book I was carrying when Frey ordered me to the back of Haynes' car. Charles Gary pointed out that I could not very well have carried a gun and a law book in my right hand at the same time, but even more crucial was my reason for carrying it. Reading to the police from law books was the only defense I had in case of unlawful arrest. I had done it countless times in the past, and there are hundreds of black people in the community who have seen me do it and can testify that it was my common practice. I carried it again on the morning of October 28th to read the law to Officer Frey. It was an action that Jensen could not distort for his own ends. Perhaps Jensen's most grievous and callous omission during the entire trial was his failure to point out that a vital word in the transcript of Greer's conversation with Inspector McConnell had been changed. It was only by accident that Charles Gary discovered that this word had been incorrectly transcribed by a typist in the district attorney's office from the tape that Inspector McConnell had made with Greer. And yet this one word was so important that it called into doubt Greer's identification of me from the picture McConnell showed him at police headquarters. To make matters worse, Gary discovered this error only after the trial proper was over, and the jury had been out deliberating the verdict for a day. On September 5th, the jury requested to see the transcript, and Judge Friedman called Gary and Jensen into his chambers to ask them for a copy. There was no court copy. The trial clerk had forgotten to acquire one as evidence, and Charles Gary had lent his only copy to someone else. So Jensen went to get his and came back with the original working copy of the transcription. As Gary quickly looked through it, he paused in disbelief over a section of Greer's testimony. There, over the crucial word, was a handwritten correction, completely reversing the meaning of the sentence. This section read, "About how old?" Answer, "I couldn't say because I had only my lights on. I couldn't. I did get a clear picture, clear view of his face, but because he had his head kind of down facing the headlights of the coach and I couldn't get a good look over the word did, someone had written in the word didn't." But throughout the trial, Jensen, knowing that this issue was crucial, had neglected to inform Gary, the jury, and the court that there was a question in the transcript of how clearly Greer had been able to see. Indeed, Jensen's contention was that Greer had gotten a good look and was therefore in position to identify that person as me. As long as there was the slightest doubt in his mind about whether the word was did or didn't, he had a moral obligation to inform the court and the defense counsel. And it was an absolute matter of conscience that he listened again to the tape to see what the word actually was. He never bothered. In this important matter and in all other dubious issues, the position of the bullet casings, the police tapes, the hiding of Greer, the keeping of important witnesses off the stand, and changing of Greer's original testimony, Lowell Jensen proved less than honorable. It was in the prosecutor's job to convict a guilty man, not an innocent man. And in my case, Jensen had many reasons to believe I was innocent. He chose to ignore all of them. When the prosecution rested his case, Charles Gary, on the morning of August 19th, moved for another mistrial. He based his motion on the fact that it was impossible for me to receive a fair trial in Oakland because of the atmosphere of hatred, violence, and controversy. As proof of this, he read the court samples of hate mail that he and I had been receiving. One of the letters was from four retired Marines who said they had known Frey. The letter stated that neither Gary nor I would be alive 10 days after the trial was over, no matter what the verdict. Another letter was signed KKK and read, "Hard R lover, N-word lover." I guess you feel that the murdering coons gonna get off because the jury and witnesses all have been intimidated to the extent that no one dares convict. I hope he will be gunned down in the streets by some friends of the poor policeman he killed. The Black Panthers parade all over the place, and I don't see why the KKK and American Nazi parties couldn't do the same. It is supposed to be a free country for everybody. It is too bad we ever stopped lynching. At least the damn hard R's knew their place in those days and didn't cause any trouble. I remember reading about one time they strung up some raccoons and pulled out pieces of the flesh with corkscrews. That must have been a lot of fun. I wish I could have been there to take part in the good work. I hope this race war that we are having starts right away. We outnumber the blacks 10 to 1, so we know who will win. And a lot of damn N-word lovers will be laying right there beside him. I wish Hitler had won, and then we could have kicked off the shinnies and started in on the raccoons. This is a normal Tuesday for a white supremacist. Like, you can get really animated by how wicked and hateful that is, but that's just the average 4chan comment or the average comment I get in my comment section. Gary's request for a mistrial was denied by Judge Friedman, who refused to acknowledge that I was receiving anything but a fair trial. He felt the letters were negligible and unimportant. After this, Gary opened the defense and began on the morning of August 19th to show the jury where the truth lay. He introduced a group of witnesses who were essential to those political aspects of the case that we had been so determined to explore from the beginning. These were people from the black community, ordinary, honest, working people, who could testify with sincerity and conviction about how their lives were frequently made difficult by the occupying army of racist police. These people described being stopped, questioned, bullied, pushed around, and insulted for no reason other than the sadistic whim of some Southern cracker who hated blacks. These were the people brutalized by intruders in their own community. All had one thing in common: encounters with Officer John Frey. Daniel King, 16, related on the stand how he had met Frey around 4 o'clock one morning in West Oakland, where he was visiting his sister. They had gone out to get something to eat on 7th Street, and there, incredibly enough, had encountered a white man with no pants on. He was with Frey. Frey told King he was violating curfew, and the white man accused him of knowing the girl who had taken his pants. When King denied this, both Frey and the white man called him the hard R, a pimp, and other dirty words. Frey had held King while the white man hit him. Then he put him in a paddy wagon and took him to juvenile hall, where he spent the rest of the night. Frey did not even bother to call King's parents. Luther Smith Sr., who worked with the youth organization in Oakland, told of a number of run-ins with Frey. He testified that Frey was awful mean and had used racial epithets when talking to him. Frey had called Smith's brother a little black hard R and his son's wife a black bitch. Belford Dunning, an employee of the Prudential Life Insurance Company, described an encounter with Frey the day before he died, when Frey pushed Dunning around while he was being given a ticket by another policeman for a minor violation on his car. Dunning had said to him, "What's the matter with you? You act like you're the Gestapo or something." Frey's hand went to his revolver. "I am the Gestapo," he said. A young white school teacher, Bruce Bison, who had taught Frey in high school, invited him to come back and speak to the class about his work as a policeman. While he was talking to the high school students, Bison testified Frey referred to black people in the community as hard R's and spoke disparagingly of them as criminals and lawbreakers. Damn, this man was so racist. He goes and speaks in front of the kids about his job as a cop and can't help but say, yeah, I love being a police officer, but, them little hard R's are running around committing crime and using drugs. Yeah, the man was hella racist. And low-key, he got his issue. Gary wanted the jury to understand what black people are subjected to by cops like Frey, hung up on power. He also wanted them to realize that Frey's bloodthirstiness was responsible for his own death. Belford Dunning, the insurance man, had said to him the day before he died, "Man, if you don't lick this, you are going to last whoa. What? He also wanted them to realize that Frey's bloodthirstiness was responsible for his own death. Belford Dunning, the insurance man who was abused by Frey, had said to him the day before he died, "Man, if you don't lick this, You are not going to last very long around here. As a matter of fact, Frey's superiors had already decided to move him out of the black community into another area where he would be less of a lethal threat to innocent human beings. But they were too late, and Frey himself fulfilled Dunning's prophecy. Gary stressed this aspect of Frey's behavior, and by implication, most other policemen, over and over again during his defense. Frey was not only a bully to helpless people, he was also determined to exterminate anyone whom he considered a threat to his own dubious masculinity. You know, Gary said to the jury during his summation, since the day I got into this case, one thing has bothered me. Why in tarnation was Officer Frey so headstrong in stopping Huey Newton's automobile? I wake up at night trying to find an answer to that, and I can't. I can't find an answer. This bothers me. It is just not part of legal due process. It is not part of any understanding of justice. It is not part of any understanding of the proper administration of the law. Frankly, it is not the type of police action that I have personally witnessed. But then again, I am not a black man. I am not a Black Panther. I am part of an accepted society. I don't think any officer would stop me unless I was actually openly, overtly violating the law. What was Huey Newton doing when he was driving down 7th Street between 4:50 and 5 o'clock in the morning that warranted this officer to call in and ask for PIN, Police Intelligence Network information, and say, I got a Black Panther car, see if there's something on it? And in my opening statement, I told you that there was a plan, a concerted plan by the Oakland Police Department, together with other police departments in Alameda County, to get Huey Newton, to get the Black Panther Party, Huey Newton above all. Another thing that bothers me, and bothers me very, very much about the evidence, and it should bother you when you start analyzing it. If it is true that Officer Frey intended to arrest Huey Newton, and in fact said, I now place you under arrest, which we contend is not so, but let's assume for the sake of argument that he did. I don't understand why he didn't put handcuffs on him, since the Panthers are supposed to be such desperados. I further don't understand if he was placing him under arrest, why he passed his own automobile. I don't understand why Officer Frey took Mr. Newton to the third automobile, to the back end of it. Why? Was he going to beat him up? You know, you could very well do it. He was a heavier man, weighing 200 pounds. He went to the gym regularly, according to Officer Haynes. Huey is a 165-pounder, and Huey had a law book in his hand. Perhaps the most significant comment that can be made about the testimony of these defense witnesses from the black community is that Jensen offered no rebuttal. His silence was eloquent. I guess no one could be found to speak well of Frey. What can you say about a policeman who owned 3 guns, carried extra ammunition on his cartridge belt, and was the only member of the Oakland force who did not use the regular bullets issued by the department but spent his own money to buy a special high-velocity type? On August 24th, Charles Gary called Gene McKinney to the witness stand. When McKinney entered the courtroom that afternoon with his lawyer, Harold Perry, a feeling of excitement and expectation could be felt among the spectators. Here was one of the most important witnesses to the shooting of Haynes and Frey. Up until then, there had been considerable speculation about whether even the defense lawyers knew the name of my companion that morning. Throughout the trial, reporters and newsmen had been asking Charles Gary whether the mysterious witness would testify. When McKinney took the stand, Gary rose and asked him first his name and then whether he had been a passenger in the Volkswagen with me at the corner of 7th and Willow on the morning of October 28, 1967. Yes, I was, McKinney answered. His response electrified the courtroom. But these 2 questions were the only ones he ever answered. When Gary asked, now Mr. McKinney, at the time and place on that morning at approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, did you by chance or otherwise shoot at Officer Frey? McKinney said, I refuse to answer on the grounds it may tend to incriminate me. Jensen was outraged. He jumped to his feet and demanded that Judge Freeman direct the witness to answer. Inasmuch as he has already started to testify, said Jensen, saying he was there at the scene, he has obviously waived his right to silence. Let's hear him tell what he knows. He said he was there, and I asked that question now be read to him, and the court direct him to answer. Then followed a discussion between the prosecutor Perry and the judge about McKinney's constitutional rights, with Perry claiming McKinney need only be cross-examined on the two questions he had chosen to respond to, his name and where he was on October 28th. Beyond that, Perry claimed he was entirely within his rights to claim the Fifth Amendment. When Jensen insisted on cross-examining him, McKinney refused to answer. Here, Gary was trying to raise the question of reasonable doubt about whether there could have been only one possible person who did the shooting, me, as the prosecution claimed. But Gary and Harold Perry were also using another brilliant strategy. And Jensen understood immediately what was involved. The prosecution believed that McKinney was inviting Judge Freeman to grant him immunity in his testimony, the same immunity he had given to Del Ross, whereby nothing he said could be used against him. Then, with this protection, he could say that he had killed Frey and shot at Haynes, and that he had escaped with me. Because no evidence had been submitted during the trial to prove otherwise, he could not have been convicted of perjury, thus having absolved me of the crime and having freed himself of any danger of prosecution, since his testimony could not be used against him. Both of us could have walked out of the courtroom at liberty. But Jensen and Freeman, believing this was the strategy, were having none of it. After questioning McKinney carefully to make sure he realized he was liable for contempt, Judge Freeman ordered him immediately sent to jail for refusing to testify. He later sentenced him to 6 months, but the California Superior Court reversed the decision, stating that McKinney had acted within his constitutional rights. After spending a few weeks in the county jail, McKinney was released on bail. As I said, he is a courageous man. Continuing here, just checking how many pages we got left. Just checking how many pages we got left on this text. Because it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. Yeah, it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. Can we keep pressing? I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to wrap it up here. Even though I could do it. Okay? I'm going to wrap it up here just to not overburden the people. It's a very long chapter. We'll wrap it up tomorrow. We've been reading for an hour and a half, pretty hard, pretty straight. So I'm going to wrap it up here. And we're going to pick up with basically the passenger who was in the car giving his testimony. You know what I'm saying? And we're going to pick up right here. There's a lot more pages. There's like 20 more pages. Okay, hold on. Yeah. All right, yeah, we're going to pick up on page 230. We're going to wrap it up here. Shout out to Kareth J. joining the live stream. He says he was at work. Like everybody, you know, we're all at work. Everybody's just not getting off work or about to go to sleep like I am. So, yeah, shout out to everybody who joined this live stream and who's going to be watching this in the playback and who is definitely supporting all this content that we are doing on this channel as we continue to celebrate Black History Month and the legacy of Huey P. Newton. We're going to end the poll right here on this channel. We had 1 vote. The Black Panthers were an overall net positive. We got 11 votes here. Let's end the poll and, of course, see the right-wing results. We're going to see the right-wing results pop up here, wherever they are. All right. Yes, the world would be better if the OG Black Panthers never stopped. 46% said yes. Okay, and we got a large chunction of fuck Donald Trump and all MAGA. I love that. I always love that. So yeah, that's it. That's all I gotta say. Hopefully you enjoyed this live stream. Shout out to everybody else. We're gonna pick up and finish chapter 26 for tomorrow. Hopefully we can wrap it up in about an hour. It's not the best. It's not the most exciting chapter. It's not the sexiest chapter, but it is very important, you know, and maybe it's interesting for the 3 or 4 legal heads out there who like that type of content. Anyway, Revolutionary Suicide, still a dope book, though I'm not a big fan of the procedural stuff when it's done in these types of texts. But we're going to wrap it up here, and y'all be easy and peace.